Hello, I'm Michelle.
And I'm Lucy.
Welcome to another Cameo episode. The not-so-short episodes. Definitively not short episode on this one.
Nope, definitely not.
And today...
Felice della Rovere. And I'm going to call her Felice because I could never get my tongue around Rovere when I was doing Julia. So she's just going to be Felice.
Okay. Interesting name. Felicity, I'm assuming, in English?
It's not a girl's name. It's a boy's name.
I thought so, but then you said she.
Yes, she's a she, but she should be a Felicia or a Felicita. I don't know why she was given a boy's name.
Her father so desperately wanted a boy, he hoped he could change it just by the name.
It did prove quite useful later on. Her parents were Giuliano della Rovere, before he became Pope Julius II, and Lucretia, probably Normani. And we aren't 100% sure about her surname. If we've got the surname right, she came from one of the oldest families in Rome.
Ooh.
Although by the end of the 15th century, the Normani had sort of plummeted down the social scale.
Yeah, they're not a name I recognize at all.
No, the Orsini and Colonna sort of muscled in on Rome and nudged everybody else out the way.
Right. Were they still wealthy, or were they poor with no power? She has to have some sort of power if she's going to end up as the mistress of a pope eventually.
Well, she's not a courtesan or anything like that. I mean, she's a respectable
noble woman. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't know anything about the relationship between Della Rovere and Lucretia. Maybe it's a long-term loving relationship. Maybe it was a quick knee trembler behind St. Peter's. We just don't know.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Della Rovere acknowledged the baby, but Lucretia was married off to a man called Bernardino dei Cupis, either just before or soon after Felice's birth.
To regain her, what's that called? Virtue.
Decency, yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Bernardino, he sounds like a very nice man. He was on the staff of another of Sixtus's cardinal nephews, Girolamo della Rovere, and it was quite common for discarded or ongoing lovers to be married off to high-ranking servants, as we saw with Alexander.
Yeah.
Yeah, it saved face all round.
Well, they are high-ranking servants. It's not like, he's the sewer that you got from downtown.
No, he did very well for himself. And that was another reason for doing it, because you hoped that the person you were accommodating, so to speak, would be very grateful. And would give you, stuff.
Yes.
And he was very loyal to the Rovere family, and this was a way of showing it.
Okay. A reward and a promise. Basically. Okay. I wonder how she felt, though.
His chosen emblem was the acorn. And since, if you remember Pope Julius's episode, the Rovere emblem was the oak, so it's not hard to see where he was going with that.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I'm a little one of you. Felice knew she was Della Rovere's daughter, and so did everyone else. Just because he married Lucretia off to another man, it didn't mean they were trying to hide Felice's paternity.
No, at this point, it's so common for everybody to have children. Did her dad love her as much as Alexander loved Lucretia and his kids?
I'd say on and off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Lucretia and Bernardino didn't differentiate between Felice and her half-siblings. Or if they did, it was to show her more respect, really, since her father was cardinal and her great-uncle was pope, so... I don't know how that played out with the other siblings.
Yeah.
You've got to be nice to Felice because her great-uncle's pope.
Yeah, and she may be a bastard, but that's not really looked at very much in Italy.
No.
No.
No, it was meant to be the golden age of bastards, wasn't it?
Yes.
Somebody said.
Yes.
And then Sixtus died and Rodrigo Borgia became pope, but more of that in a minute. And we've heard many times of the ecclesiastical folk with their many benefices, most of which they didn't even bother to visit. Girolamo was no exception, but luckily he had Bernardino, and he stepped in and actually did the things that Girolamo was meant to do in his diocese, except presumably take Mass. Well, Girolamo pocketed the money. And we've wondered, these people just never seem to go to their diocese. Well, it turns out, no, you have a pet Bernardino who goes and does it all for you.
Oh. So it wasn't even expected at all.
Well, I expect they probably quite like you to turn up, but...
Yeah.
But he was very popular, Bernardino. When he announced that he was expecting their first son, the community clubbed together to give him 25 ducats as a present for his wife. So, nice.
I find it so funny. We go all out to find gifts that mean something to somebody, and they just give money.
Yes, it does seem to be a different idea of...
Yep.
And yet, which of us wouldn't rather have money, really? I mean, when you get a present, you think, God, but how much this cost? And what I could have done with that.
Oh, that's not the way I think. But then most of the presents around here are handmade.
Well, that's nice.
So, yeah, it's a different vibe.
And as I say, we shouldn't have the idea that he was an impoverished servant. He built his family a magnificent house as well as a chapel. So, he was doing all right.
Yeah, well, when you're a servant to an upper nobleman, you usually are from a slightly lower status, not no status at all.
Yeah, it's a bit like being a lady in waiting, isn't it? You're not the dregs.
No.
You're very high up.
Yeah, queens expected to have duchesses as their servants.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And that carried all the way down.
Yeah, so, he's obviously an important character. Mm-hmm. Lucretia, Felice, and Felice's half-brother and half-sister were a very close family. And it's quite unusual since normally illegitimate children were taken into their father's household, but maybe it wouldn't have been appropriate in the circumstances.
Yeah. Well, Cesare and Juan and... Oh, my goodness.
Joffrey.
He's the one I couldn't remember.
Joffrey, come on, Joffrey. Everyone remembers Joffrey.
They didn't live in Alexander's house either. So is it because it's a churchman thing?
They didn't live with their mother. They lived with some
An aunt.
relation of Alexander's, yeah.
Yes, Alexander's sister.
So I suppose, yes, when they're growing up, they probably didn't want little children running around the Vatican.
Yeah.
Making it too obvious.
So if you're a churchman, they can't stay with you, so they stay with, yes, your family, but your family extended.
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay.
Yeah. This marriage with Bernardino it was a marriage of convenience, obviously, but it seemed to be a loving family. When he died, he made Lucretia sole heir, even though he had sons, so he obviously trusted her.
Ooh, that's not going to make people happy.
Depends how old the sons were at that point. I can't quite remember. When Rodrigo Borgia became Pope, della Rovere sailed to France, as we heard. But what of young Felice?
Yeah.
It was a worry that she might be kidnapped and used as a bargaining chip against her father.
Yes.
So we believe that she was sent to her father's hometown of Savona. She was 11 at this point.
She's in... Oh, wait, no, I'm thinking Alexander. I was about to say Spain. The wrong person.
It's near Genoa.
Okay.
She was being taken away from her close-knit family to live with people she didn't know.
Oh, that's hard. How old is she?
11.
11. That's not a good time for that to happen.
No, and she had to sail there, which had been quite traumatic for someone who'd never left Rome before.
Yeah.
And she appears to have blamed Borgia for her exile and would hold a grudge against them for the rest of her life. Mind you, that's probably pummeled into her by her dad, I should think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We hate the Borgias.
Yes. Well, and it is true. If she's being taken to safety because of the Borgias, then yeah, it's directly related to them.
Yeah.
What a good churchman to become pope. People actually flee.
Yes. In Savona, Felice lost her special status because Rome was a church city, so those of the cloth were revered, and so Felice, being a cardinal's daughter, had some status. Savona was a seafaring town. The daughter of a cardinal would have had no special treatment there.
Oh.
Imagine her stamping her foot saying, "But don't you know who I am?" And then
yes.
saying, "Yes, aren't you the bastard daughter of some priest or something?"
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't seem to have got on with this other family. She kept in contact with her mother and stepfather and her half-siblings from Rome, But she didn't keep in contact with her Savona relatives. She didn't seem to warm to them very much. But then again, if she's demanding special treatment, perhaps she wasn't very easy to get on with.
Yeah. And if they denied her that special treatment, she wouldn't be happy with them.
No, and she was obviously very homesick for Rome. In fact, she was, throughout her entire life, she's just hankers for Rome if she has to be away. Meanwhile, della Rovere was trying to persuade the French to take Genoa and Savona so that he could rule the area himself as prince. And it seems a bit risky asking the French to capture a town where his daughter was then living.
Yeah.
But while he was waiting for the French to do their stuff, he built himself a palace in Savona, fit for the prince that he hoped to become. I mean, it's a bit much, isn't it? Of course I'm going to become a prince. Now I've got to build a palace. And then he must have been very disappointed when it never happened.
Cart before the horse much?
Yes, I think so. In 1497-8, della Rovere found a husband for his daughter, and she was none too pleased about the idea.
About the idea of marriage or about the person?
About the idea of marriage at all.
Oh,
She
okay.
didn't hold with it. It wasn't that she was very chaste and virtuous and religious and wanted to go into a convent or anything. She just didn't really want to get married. And she made her point clear. Very clear. Well, she'd already refused several of the men that her father had suggested to her. And we're not quite sure why she agreed to this one. In fact, we don't know anything about him, really. We think he came from the Savona area, which may explain why she was reluctant, because she might have thought she'd never get back to Rome if she married someone from Savona. All we know is that he was dead by 1505, since della Rovere was lining up other men for Felice to refuse. But it meant that she'd already been married. She was a widow, so she wouldn't necessarily need a second marriage if she could live on the dowry from her first marriage.
Ah, right. Okay. I'm surprised her father even gave her the option of refusing.
Yes, she's a forceful personality. I mean, he's a forceful personality.
Yeah.
But I should imagine there was a lot of raging and carpet biting and from Julius.
Oh, dear.
Well, Giovanni as he was then. She was now living in her father's palace. And since he was often away from home, she ran the palace herself.
Oh, so she's her own mistress. Why would she want to get married to somebody she didn't choose? Yeah.
Yes, but to say no to Giuliano de Rovere is it's a brave move, I think.
Yeah.
Not many people said no to him.
It's different when it's your dad.
When he was there, the palace became a hub of intrigue against Pope Alexander. There was also a stream of people who'd fallen on hard times turning up at the palace for help. And Felice always had sympathy for the underdog.
Oh, that's nice.
Maybe because she felt she didn't really belong there herself.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But then, a piece of good news. Alexander had died.
It's always horrible when we say that.
It is.
Good news, he's dead.
Hooray!
Oh, okay.
We heard that della Rovere, I'd be glad when he's Pope, I found della Rovere really difficult to say, failed to secure the papacy the first time, but was successful the second. And a small matter of interest, the man whose job it was to lock the cardinals in to make their decision was Bernardino. Felice's stepdad. Della Rovere became Pope Julius in the quickest election in papal election in history.
So he locked in only the people that could conspire to get this Pope out.
Maybe that's how he did it, yes. Other people arrived and he said, no, sorry, you're too late, I've locked the door.
Yeah.
Of course, this had a knock-on effect for Felice, because she stopped being a cardinal's daughter and became the Pope's daughter.
Which is huge.
And probably more importantly for her, she could go home.
Back to Rome.
Yes, back to Rome. Yes, it seems a bit like those Chekhov plays where the sisters are desperate to get to Moscow all the time. She seems to be quite similar. However, there's a downside to being the Pope's daughter. The Pope's only daughter is that she was now a valuable asset in the marriage market, and she would find it much harder to resist the attempts to get her married off.
Yep.
We don't hear of Julius inviting his daughter to the inauguration of the papacy, but it is known that he was keen to draw a line under the Borgia's name. So maybe he felt that he didn't want to fill the Vatican with his family in the way that the Borgias had done.
Yes. Do everything the opposite of what the Borgias had done.
And given how quickly the rumours spread about incest between Alexander and Lucretia, maybe he had that in the back of his mind as well, thinking, I think she can stay where she is. I mean, she wasn't hidden away.
No, she just wasn't in the immediate vicinity.
She wasn't in your face, yes. She's in Raphael's The Mass of Bolsena, and she's shown on the left amongst a group of onlookers. But she's there, and we know it's her. So, yeah, she's not a complete, what would be the word?
Absentia?
She's not hidden in a closet or anything.
Right.
When Felice arrived in Rome, her father greeted her with great honour, even sending galleons out to accompany her ship into port. And this was an honour because it was a rule of thumb that the further from Rome the welcome committee was, the more honorific it was.
Ah, makes sense. You have to pay everybody to travel.
Yeah, it did also mean that the welcome took place far from the centre of Rome and therefore was a bit more discreet. Maybe that was something to do with it, yes.
Oh, right.
Felice went to stay with her old family, which must have pleased her a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And also, because Bernardino was working in the Vatican, all the Vatican gossip got back to his place, and Felice was now in the loop at last. She wasn't out in some obscure little town miles from anywhere.
Right. And people love a bit of gossip.
Oh, yeah, especially Vatican gossip, I should think.
Yes. Well, it was very scandalous.
Yeah, less so with Julius, but yes, I mean, there was certainly... Yes, there's always something to talk about. In 1504, we read in a chronicle of political history, quote, "The Pope is arranging a wedding for his only daughter Felice, who is in Savona and is awaited in Rome, to the Signor of Piombo, Lord Appiano," unquote.
So not a king?
No.
Okay.
No, just a lord, not even a prince.
Yeah.
Anyway, who was Jacopo Appiano, the Lord of Piombino, and why was he chosen as a potential husband by Julius?
Jacopo with a P?
Yes.
Oh,
probably
interesting. I haven't heard
Jacob.
that.
But Appiano presumably comes from the family who built the Appian Way. Probably a very ancient family. Piombino was a small enclave, but it was near Genoa and Savona. So Julius may have thought it was useful for that. And also, Jacopo was on good terms with Naples, Florence, Pisa and Siena, so he's already using the marriages to make links.
Right. With the cities trying to not have the same battles that Alexander did.
Yeah, yeah. And the terms of the settlement were good too. If Jacopo were to die and Felice were to have a male child, the state would go to the boy. If she didn't have a son, the state would go to her.
Oh.
And that was quite rare for the time. Pope Alexander arranged something similar for Lucretia, but it wasn't common.
No, not at all.
And then suddenly it was all off.
Oh, it's one of those.
I wondered if she said, "Where's he from? Savona?" No.
You want me to go back there?
No.
Nope. Absolutely not.
And she was being betrothed to René of Anjou's son. So, presumably, Margaret of Anjou's brother.
Yeah. Who thinks he's the King of Naples?
Maybe Julius was thinking that a French alliance would be more useful and more prestigious. But then suddenly, the French alliance was off.
Oh, my goodness.
And Felice was sailing back to Savona to act as a go-between for the Pope and the mercantile community of Savona. The merchants were keen to cash in on having a Pope who was native to their city. I mean, it'd be daft not to make the most of it. So Felice was now working effectively as an envoy.
That's pretty prestigious for a girl.
And this was a role she was happiest in. We've no idea why the French alliance failed. It's quite likely that Felice put her foot down again. And we certainly know that her father was getting exasperated with her. Quite a few comments. So, for goodness sake, don't go in there now. He's just been talking to his daughter. I thought, okay, I'll leave it till tomorrow.
Yes.
Julius now considered marrying Felice into the Colonna family. Then he considered 2 of the d'Este boys for her, and she had a lucky escape there, because one thing we know about the d'Este family,
Yes.
syphilis.
Syphilis.
They've all got it.
Everybody's got the squishy disease now.
Yes, and I don't know which sons she was being foisted on her, but I know the youngest one died of it quite young.
Ooh.
And there was a good reason. One of them was Ippolito d'Este, and for Julius it would have been a really good deal, because although Ippolito would have had to give up his cardinalship, his elder brother was Alfonso, and he was known to be on the side of Venice, and this would later cause trouble between Alfonso and Julius, as we know. Julius really had it in for Alfonso. If Felice married Ippolito, and if Julius made it a stipulation that Ippolito should be heir to the d'Este dukedom, Alfonso would be deposed, and so by default would Lucretia Borgia, his wife, and that would be win-win for Julius.
And for Felice, she'd be one up on Lucretia.
Yeah, and one up on Isabella as well, because she'd be Duchess of Ferrara.
Hmm.
But thankfully for Felice, that was another betrothal that bit the dust. Next on the agenda was Roberto di San Severino, Prince of Salerno. And this would have been an excellent match for Severino, since, following an attempted rebellion by his father, he was prince in name only. But part of the deal was that Julius promised to negotiate with Federico of Naples to get Salerno back. But again, Felice said, no, not doing it.
Wonder why.
The Venetian ambassador wrote, quote, "Finding myself today with the Duke of Urbino, His Excellency apprised me of the fact that the marriage of Madonna Felice with the prince is in difficulty, and the cause is the lady who does not want it to take place, citing his poverty, and also because it is said that he has another woman." I mean, that's going to be a problem, because they will all have other women, won't they?
Yes.
The Duke believes the whole affair is in disarray, as the difficulties are great, because, he says, this woman has let her words be heard, and now they've reached the ears of the prince.
Uh-oh.
Even if the objections of the state of Naples were to cease, the lady would not wish to enter into his hands due to her fear of having an unhappy life with him. That's probably behind most of it. She probably thinks, well, I don't think he's very nice, and I've got to live with him.
But she said no to pretty much everything. I wonder if she doesn't like men.
That's possible.
That's a possibility.
Yeah.
If she's saying no to everybody, perhaps it's just, I don't want a heterosexual relationship. And unfortunately, as a wife, I have duties to perform.
Yes. And I can't really say to my dad, the Pope, well, can you find me a woman?
Yeah. Can
gonna
I marry
happen.
a woman?
The Duke then accused the lady of instability, stating that many times the Pope, even when he was cardinal, had wished her to marry, but she has remained a widow and has always found reasons to be opposed to the men proposed, saying that she prefers to be left to depend upon her own resources. However, now the Pope is disposed to give her away to anyone and to send her away from Rome so as not to have to behold this shameful creature in front of his own eyes, unquote.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's just opening the door of the Vatican and saying, "Oi, you, come and marry my daughter." So Felice's aversion to marriage had become common knowledge, and the Pope was embarrassed, I should imagine, at his inability to control his own daughter.
Ah, right. I couldn't understand the embarrassment, but yeah, if he can't control his own daughter, and he's the Pope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even his own army commanders were afraid of him. So for her to stand up to him. And we know he was very angry when she dismissed San Severino. He probably thought, oh, for goodness sake, I mean, how many have we had now? About 10.
Pick one. I don't care which. Or just don't give her a choice.
Yeah.
Although that is kind of hard. Well, hard for him. The Catholic Church at this point was already saying that the female had to approve of the marriage before they would be wed.
Mm.
So I was going to say it's kind of hard for the Pope to go against that, but look at what Alexander was doing. Yeah, no, never mind. Popes don't care.
I think Lucretia agreed to everything, really, didn't she?
True.
She's very keen to go to Ferrara.
I was more along the lines of saying that they weren't following any of the other strictures that a Pope was supposed to. Why follow this one? It's a pretty minor one.
Yes. But it's interesting that the Duke of Urbino described her as unstable, because that must have seemed like the only explanation for a woman who defied her father's wishes for her marriage. Women just didn't do that.
No.
On the other side, she wasn't a nobleman's daughter. She was the daughter of a humble cleric done good. And she hadn't been brought up with the natural knowledge of how to conduct herself in the nobility. She may have felt afraid she'd sort of slip up, eat with the wrong spoon or drink the finger bowl water or something. And maybe this worry about the lack of natural nobility was why she sought the company of Baldassare Castiglione, who wrote the Book of the Courtier.
Oh, she's getting lessons or something. That's smart.
He'd already coached Raphael in court etiquette.
Yeah.
So he's got a nice little sideline, and okay, this is how you do this. You bow at this point. Yeah. Don't upset Paris de Gracis, because you'll never hear the end of it if you bow at the wrong moment, or don't bow at all. She is mentioned in his book, the Book of the Courtier, as a woman who would rather die than lose her chastity. So
she was already married once.
Yes. Someone else's good opinion that Felice was keen to garner, which will be a mystery to us since we didn't like her, was Isabella d'Este. I need to say goldfish again. A goldsmith. A goldsmith, a mutual friend of Felice and Isabella, wrote to Isabella, quote, "You would be so comfortable staying here amid sweet female companions, and especially that of Madonna Felice, the daughter of the Pope, who is a most noble lady of a noble intelligence and goodness, and dedicated to letters, antiquities, and all virtuous works, and a slave to your ladyship, as she has repeated to me many times in speaking with her," unquote. Now, I think Isabella will be quite pleased with that. A slave to your ladyship. She'll like that. Felice had a great love of reading, and we know she did actually love reading, since her library not only contained beautiful tomes of the works of Pliny and Suetonius and that lot, but also cheap copies that you wouldn't buy just to display in your library, but you buy for reading.
To read
them. So we know it wasn't all show.
Paperback versus hardcover.
Yeah.
Actually, I love hardcover. I love reading hardcover. It just feels more substantial to me.
It does. When I was just reading Castiglione as the Courtier, and every page I turned fell out. So I ended up with just a mass of papers stuffed in the covers. To start with, I was sticking them together with sellotape, but I thought, no, this is ridiculous. There's 300 pages here. By 1506, Felice was 23, and she was getting too old to be much use on the marriage market.
At 23, she's too old.
Well, yeah. She'd not be able to carry on living an independent life as a widow indefinitely, especially against her father's wishes. Eventually, it would be made clear to her that the next step would be a convent, and she really wasn't suited to cloistered life. Really not. And her father hadn't given up. The next eligible bachelor was Gian Giordano Orsini. He wasn't a duke or a prince, but on the plus side, he lived in Rome.
And he wasn't a convent.
No. Well, Felice wouldn't be shipped off to some far-flung corner of Italy. She could stay home. Mm-hmm. And for Julius, this was a good option. He was pro-Orsini, on the basis that the Borgias had been pro-Colonna. And he was keen to stop the fighting between two families for the pragmatic reason he was doing lots of building in Rome and he didn't want it all burnt down again.
That's a good... I like that. That's good goals.
Yes. Yes. It'll be extremely frustrating.
Yeah.
But he couldn't be seen to side purely with the Orsini, so he offered his daughter to an Orsini and his niece to a Colonna. Gian Giordano had been married before to a Maria d'Aragona of Naples, illegitimate daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon, and they had had 3 children, including a boy called Napoleon, or Napoleone.
So she doesn't have to produce an heir.
No.
That would be something she'd be happy about.
Yes, but I mean, it'd be handy, because that's, if anything happens to Napoleon, it's, it's handy to have the spare, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Gian Giordano was a condottiere, a mercenary who was in the pay of France and had become very pro-French. And he was described by a cousin of Felice as, quote, pubblico pazzo, unquote, plainly mad. And I'd agree. I think she's right. Louis of France had once lost 20,000 ducats to him at cards. 20,000!
Oh, I'd like 20,000 ducats right now.
Well, play Louis XII at cards. Gian Giordano has reasons to side with Julius because Alexander VI had poisoned his father and taken his land, allegedly. I mean, we don't know whether they actually poisoned anybody, but that's the rumour.
With emphasis, anybody?
Julius returned the land, but obviously he couldn't return the father. So, Gian Giordano was quite, not a bad bet. He had no financial reason for marrying Felice since Julius had made it very clear he wasn't going to offer a huge dowry. Some saw this as punishment for Felice for turning down the other options, for which he'd offered a much larger dowry. It's surprising why he decided it was all right. He thought it was important to keep himself in with the Pope, but I can't imagine he particularly wanted her because she had a reputation for being difficult.
Oh. Yeah, but he doesn't really have to live with her. He can have a different woman on this side and just put her in a different house.
Yeah, I don't think she'll put up with that.
Oh, yeah, she might like the different house, but she won't. Just because she's not sleeping with you doesn't mean she wants anybody else to. Yeah, that's unreasonable.
Yes. The celebration of the wedding was an obvious snub to Felice by her father, because his niece's wedding to Marc Antonio Colonna had a public procession from the Vatican to the Colonna Palace. When Felice got married, Julius sent out a public proclamation forbidding any celebration.
Why? Is he that miffed with her?
Yeah, he was. She wasn't married in the Vatican, but at the palace of one of her cousins, and Julius wasn't present.
Ooh. That does not bode well for a family alliance. Like, now you're sitting there watching all this happen with your wife standing there. Like, am I actually benefiting from marrying into the Pope's family? He's not here. We're screwed.
But then again, he didn't bother to turn up for a while. Paris de Gracis tells us that the ceremony was meant to start at 4, but Gian Giordano had consulted an astrologer who told him that a more auspicious time would be 7. So Felice had to sit in the chapel for 3 hours waiting for him. When he did turn up, he wasn't dressed for the wedding. He'd obviously come straight from the hunt.
Oh my goodness, she would hate him.
Yeah, well, quote, with leather leggings and rough boots, a cheap felt hat, an untrimmed beard, uncombed hair, and dismal clothes, unquote. And Paris de Gracis was very dismissive of the wedding rings. They were, quote, poor things, worth no more than a couple of ducats, unquote.
Oh dear.
Gian Giordano did get changed and brush his hair before the actual ceremony, but I got the impression he was doing it at the back of the chapel, quickly getting changed. Poor Felice was just hopelessly confused throughout the ceremony. Gian Giordano suddenly produced a handkerchief, handed it to one of his aides and told him to give it to Felice. And she took it, but she had no idea what she was meant to do with it. This wasn't part of the ceremony. Unless he was saying, have a hanky, you've got a runny nose or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
After the ceremony, he gave her a French kiss, and all that was required was a light peck, and she was hideously embarrassed. Suddenly this man grabs her and shoves his face into
tongue down her throat.
And then they went off and immediately consummated the marriage.
He's been hunting all day, didn't even have time for a bath.
I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, it was less unbridled lust than more, right, neither of you can get out of this now. And a letter sent back to Isabella d'Este said that it took 15 minutes. That's a lovely romantic moment. So you would think it couldn't get any worse. When they went back to the Orsini Palace for the celebrations, Paris de Gracis was horrified at the state of the place. Gian Giordano had made no attempt to rebuild it since the Colonna family had attacked it 20 years ago.
Oh, no. There's still cannonballs floating around.
It's full of masonry and things, yeah. Paris de Grassis noted that the only new piece of furniture in the place was a bed. And Isabella d'Este's correspondent told her that when they went from the service back to the Orsini place, Gian Giordano had insisted they walk down a narrow, seedy little street where they had to run the gauntlet of prostitutes and pimps.
Wow.
As they went into the Orsini place, she continued, the correspondent continued, Gian Giordano took off his hat and plonked it on his wife's head. And she didn't appear to think this was very funny. She quickly whisked it off and gave it back to him. And the food was awful. There was no knives, and the meat was so tough they couldn't pull it apart with their fingers.
Good choice.
Yeah.
Anybody else sounds like they might have been better.
Yes, it is beginning to sound suspiciously as if Gian Giordano is a punishment for Felice.
Yes.
I'll learn you to keep saying no.
Yep.
The following day, Felice set off with her new husband for his castle at Bracciano, 30 kilometres north of Rome. All the way there, she'd have been passing through Orsini country, because they had a lot of land. Bracciano is a fortress of grey stone built in the 12th century and perched on a rock, and it must have seemed pretty daunting for someone from Rome.
Right.
It had been renovated by Gian Giordano's grandfather in 1470, but he hadn't modernised it in any way or made it more comfortable. He'd just made it bigger. So it would make a really good story, this, as she arrives and the wind whistling through and seeing this gaunt shape on a cliff top.
Still doesn't have glass in the windows.
Yeah. With the Orsini family, Felice hit the same problem she had in Savona. Her social standing, as far as she saw it, was greatly superior to her social standing as far as they saw it. She got on better with Orsini, who had entered the clergy, since they looked up to her as the Pope's daughter. The nobles who had attained greatness purely through their bloodline had little interest, either in her or for her, actually, because she preferred people who could actually do something. She got on very well with Giovanni de' Medici, future Leo X, whose mother had been an Orsini. Soon after they married, Gian Giordano set off for Spain. So that must have been great relief for everybody, I should think. The only extant letter from Gian Giordano to Felice comes from this journey, and he had terrible writing. It's barely decipherable.
Oh.
But we do know that Ferdinand of Aragon put on a concert for him, and he managed to obtain 8 yards of black velvet. We can read that much. And this would be useful since he insisted his household should all dress like Spaniards, and they all wore black.
Oh.
Felice's letters to him were about political events. There was none of this wishing he were home stuff that we get from Margaret Paston.
Please stay away. You're going to go do this in Barcelona, right? Right? You do need to go do that? It's going to take you several months? Okay, good.
Mind you, she's stuck there with the family, and I get the impression that they don't think a lot of her. She doesn't think a lot of them.
Yeah, but she doesn't have to perform her conjugal duties, which is probably something she sounds like she doesn't want to do.
Still, it only takes 15 minutes.
I mean, if she's obsessed with her chastity...
I don't know if she's obsessed with chastity. She just didn't want to marry anybody.
Well, that guy said chastity.
Yeah, he did. But then maybe that's what the only thing they could understand.
Assumed?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. It doesn't necessarily mean that the couple didn't get on, but their partnership was based on her ability to manage the estate while he was off on condottieri and diplomatic missions. They both had their roles to play. And their roles wasn't really, soppy love stuff. It was political, nitty-gritty stuff. I had a sudden horrible thought for a second that this was the Valentine's Day episode. But we did that yesterday. I suddenly thought, why have I chosen this? No, we recorded that yesterday. That's all right. But one of Felice's roles was, of course, to provide the Orsini with a boy. And this boy would shove Gian Giordano's son Napoleone, out of the inheritance and would ensure Felice her status. So, worth gritting her teeth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. 15 minutes and it's over. That's all you've got to do. Keep thinking, It's only 15 minutes. It's only 15 minutes. If Gian Giordano were to die while the boy was still a minor, Felice would become regent of the family. If Gian Giordano died and she hadn't borne him a son, she would be nothing.
Yeah.
She's got to get on with it, which is a horrible thought. In 1507, she did have a child, but it was just a girl, Julia.
Boy without a winkle.
Boy without a winkle. But the next year, they did the thing properly and had a son.
It took 18 minutes.
Well, that included the cigarette at the end. They called the son Giulio. So she was obviously making it very obvious who her father was in her name choices,
Yes.
Julia and Giulio. But the poor little Giulio didn't last long, sadly.
Oh.
Maybe the baby naming did the trick, as Felice and her father got on a lot better after she was married. All right, she's gone through with it. She's doing her bit.
Well, she's not arguing with him incessantly.
He invited the couple to the Vatican, where there was much feasting and merriment. And Julius gave his daughter gifts of money, but in quite an underhand way. It was for her, not for Gian Giordano, so she could spend it on whatever she chose. It's nice. And what she chose to spend it on was a castle of her very own. You know, a lot of money this was. It's not just...
In Rome?
Not just, here's a fiver, don't tell your mother or anything. Just outside Rome. And this would be something to fall back on if the worst happened and Gian Giordano died before they had a living son. But a woman buying property was a very rare thing. Especially a married woman. Women could own property that came with their dowries, but they didn't buy it.
Right.
Felice bought it from another Orsini, one who had suffered under the Borgias and was only too happy to have a bit of ready cash. And he was also happy it wasn't going out of the family. I mean, she could say to him, "Look, I'm an Orsini too," even though this was going to be a sort of bolt hole from the Orsinis, should she need it. And this one was by the coast, so she could share her love of the sea with her father. One thing I didn't mention about that thing by Erasmus that we read was that Erasmus called Julius the boatman because he seemed to have complete contempt for the fact that Julius liked messing about in boats.
Why is it that people of high status are not allowed to like anything that somebody would do that is not part of the status?
And anything that sounds
Who was
fun.
it that, like, somebody liked digging ditches? Which one was that?
I don't know. Alonso d'Este had his own forge, and his dad seemed to think it was perfectly fine that he spent all day at the brothel, but to have your own forge was absolutely disgraceful.
Scandalous.
Not only was Felice a property owner in her own right, she also became very wealthy with the sale of grain to Rome, because she had a lot of land that came with this castle.
Okay.
This independence does seem to be very important to her. All right, so she capitulated to her father about the marriage, but that didn't mean she had to be totally dependent either on her father or her husband.
Mm-hmm. So she's smart.
She's smart.
Economically smart.
And smart in every way, I think. She developed a partnership with the general contractor for the Vatican, which ensured that the papal court would buy her grain.
Oh.
And she was able to use the papal fleet to ship her grain to other city-states, so presumably she didn't have to pay for that, as her dad's the Pope.
Oh.
Yeah. She signed herself in business documents Felix Ruveris Usinis, a Latin translation of her name, but also meaning the fortunate one, Felix, of the oak, Ruveris, and the bear, because the Orsini are the bears.
Oh.
And it may have helped that she'd been given this masculine name, since not everyone she sold grain to was known that they were dealing with a woman.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, so clever. I like her.
I knew you would. Because she's like Caterina Sforza. She just doesn't...
Yeah.
She doesn't take any crapola from anyone, does she?
Yeah. This is awesome.
Yeah. We heard in Julius's episode about the Pax Romana when he brought the feuding families together, and Felice was part of this. She befriended members of the Savelli family, which is another feuding family, and brokered a peace between them and the Orsini. All right, she hasn't managed to get the Orsini and the Colonna to kiss and make up, but, it's getting
But
there.
still, yeah.
Her ambassadorial work went as far as to try to prevent the Orsini siding with Venice. And we know what Julius thought about Venice. Until he decided they were all good friends, of course, but to start with. And this was the point when Julius decided to join the League of Cambrai. When Venice heard that a league had been created to fight them, and they obviously had no idea at this point that the league had actually been created to annihilate them, they looked around for condottieri to hire and chose Gian Giordano's son-in-law, much to the embarrassment of Gian Giordino, who was meant to be Team Pope. And he had links to France. And it was Felice who got him out of this dilemma. Julius called a meeting of the bankers who funded Venice's condottieri. He then left the room and left Felice to it.
Really?
She managed to persuade them not to pay any members of the Orsini family. After that, she had to stay in the Vatican under armed guard in case she was abducted or assassinated.
Yeah, she just went against her own married family.
Yes, well, either by disgruntled Orsini or the Venetians.
Ooh.
And it had got back to Venice that she was the one who'd brokered the deal. They might have thought they were doing it secretly, but, well, we know about the Council of Ten and their ministry of spies. We don't know what she offered. It was secret at the time, and it stayed that way, so...
Really, something actually stayed secret.
Yes.
Surprise!
I don't know what you offer Italian bankers. I mean, you're not going to offer them money, I wouldn't have thought, because they're the ones...
Money's easily traceable.
I don't know what she would have offered. The reason Felice was used for the job was it wouldn't have done for either Julius or Gian Giordano to have been seen to be involved. Julius couldn't be seen to be meddling in Orsini affairs, and Gian Giordano couldn't be seen to be putting the papacy before his family.
Right.
This gave Felice the recognition she craved.
Yeah, she's now in charge and she's negotiating.
Yeah, I mean, if she'd been a boy, she'd have been a cardinal.
Yeah.
And she'd have been doing this thing as a matter of course. But unfortunately, it did give her dangerous notoriety.
Right. Yeah, it does put a target on her back.
Except that by 1510, the papacy and Venice were bosom buddies.
Oh, goodness.
Now it was the French.
It's exhausting to follow the Italian political skate. I don't like it. I can't imagine being there. It's like, really? Again? Again.
Who are we? I don't know who we are. Who's our friends? I don't know. If it's Tuesday, it must be the French.
Yeah, everybody's got coats that you can reverse colors to make sure that you're on the right side every 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, now it was the French Julius didn't like. So now Julius was happy with the Orsini mercenaries selling their wares to the Venetians, and it was up to Felice to tell them the good news. But this put Gian Giordano in an even more difficult position because he worked for the French. He'd worked for them for years. And
Right.
he'd built a castle at Blois with the money he'd earned from the king.
Uh-oh. It's not your castle anymore.
Well, Gian Giordano employed Felice and her arbitration skills to mediate between France and the Pope.
Oh.
Yeah. Her husband went to France to get the terms from the French, and then the two of them went to Julius, with Felice there to back up her husband. But Julius's hands were tied. He had loyalties to his fellow League members.
Right. And he's actually going to stick with the League. That's a surprise.
He has to at this point. They're all powerful people. He's got Maximilian, Ferdinand. Oh, the rooks are back. Ferdinand.
I can hear them.
They've just come home to roost. But negotiations did take place between the papacy and France in the forms of Felice and Anne of Brittany.
Oh.
Because Anne wasn't keen on war.
No, she was not, especially not with the Pope.
No, she thought that it was her husband, Charles VIII, had been showing off, which he was.
Yeah, her and Anne of Beaujeu were very adamant about not getting involved in Italy.
Well, you wouldn't. I mean, it's a bit like Vietnam, isn't it? Once you're in,
You can't,
you can't get out. Or Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Now, Anne begged Felice to negotiate peace with Louis XII. And Felice and Anne kept the negotiations going for 2 years, but I can't honestly say there was any tangible effect. But there was a link. And for Felice, the illegitimate daughter of the Pope, to be treated as an equal by the Queen of France must have given a huge boost to her status.
Mm-hmm.
In 1511, we have Louis's Council of Pisa, where he was getting a load of rogue cardinals together to oust Julius.
Right.
One of the Spanish rogue cardinals, Bernardino Carvajal, I'm not good at Spanish, Carvajal.
Hey, I can't do French, and I've been educated in it. So we're fine.
He wanted to involve Felice in the negotiations between them and the Pope. I can't see why he'd think that she felt like a neutral character between some people who want to get rid of her dad and her dad. But he wrote Felice a letter of 1,000 pages on the subject.
Wow, that's not a letter, that's a book.
That's several volumes of books.
Yeah.
I wonder if she ever read it.
I wonder if she wrote really, really big. It was one letter per page, trying to get their point across. I am screaming at you across this letter.
It's like texting in capital letters. Julius also involved Felice in the selling of property, so that he wouldn't be accused of bribery. A bit like the way Henry VII used his groom with the stool, Hugh Dennis. Julius began to rely on her to such an extent that a Mantuan emissary said, quote, "At court, Madonna Felice is everything," unquote.
Oh, she must have been in heaven.
Yes, because he didn't want this initially. The Pope didn't want this initially. He didn't want to be like Alexander. Because Lucretia actually took over the running of the Vatican for a while.
Yes.
But, yeah, she's shown herself to be so useful that she's sort of inveigled her way in. And we get numerous letters from people saying in passing that they've been to the Vatican and Felice was there, so she was there a lot. When the Pope thought he was dying, he gave Felice part of his estates and a big wad of money.
Like full on cash. Here you go.
When he got better and impoverished himself, forking out a fortune on military campaigns...
He asked for it back?
No, he didn't ask for it back. She gave it back.
Aww.
Yeah. She said, yeah, I think you need this more than I do. However, this father and daughter affection was to take a bit of a bashing, and the catalyst was Julius's old enemy, Alfonso d'Este.
Okay.
And we heard how Julius didn't like him because he was pro-French, helped the Bentivoglio of Bologna, and kept attacking the Venetians. But worst of all was that he was mining salt, which bit into the Pope's own salt trade. So, in 1510, Julius excommunicated him. We know from Lucretia's episode that the Pope didn't think much of Lucretia's lover either, Francesco Gonzaga. Mm-hmm. He felt that he was too close to the Ferrarese court to be trusted. It's not an ideal situation for Isabella d'Este, who was brother to Alfonso and wife to Gonzaga, since she wanted red hats for her sons, and so she really didn't want to fall out with the Pope.
Right.
So she turned to Felice to see if there's anything she could do. So Felice went to Julius with a suggestion. How would it be if her daughter, Julia, and Alfonso d'Este's son were to be betrothed? The two of them are only 4. Julius was furious. He told her to get out and, quote, attend to her sewing, unquote.
Oh.
Felice had pushed it too far that time.
Yeah, and apparently her father did, too. You don't tell a woman to go attend to her sewing or knitting or whatever.
Oh. He must have known that would be quite a cutting remark, I think.
Yes, she'd be livid.
However, we are dealing with 3 massive egos here.
Yes.
Julius, Felice, and Isabella d'Este. And we hear what happens next from the Mantuan envoy, who felt that the contents of his letters were so sensitive that he wrote some of it in hieroglyphs and gave code names to all the participants. Unfortunately, he then blew it by writing at the bottom of the letter, quote, I use the name of the great Sappho for Signora Felice, unquote.
What the heck?
Don't uncode the code on the letter.
No.
Now, presumably he chose Sappho because she was the only female in Raphael's Parnassus.
Okay.
And Felice was often the only woman in the man's world of the papal court. Less explicable was his choice for Julius, which was Lesbia, who was the lover of the Roman poet Catullus,
Okay.
and was said to be no better than she should be. So I'm not sure why he went for that.
That's a statement about him?
I'm not
maybe?
sure. It's also the name of the island where Sappho lived. So when the
Yes.
Mantuan envoy said Sappho went to Lesbia, he's saying Felice went to see the Pope. So perhaps that's a better way of looking at it.
Okay.
This Mantuan envoy wrote to Isabella d'Este that Felice, quote, well disposed to do good work for Europa, which is the code name for Ippolito d'Este, and that she would do all that was possible. She has said that she will be going to Rome in 4 days and will most willingly exhaust herself in working for his good. She will also bring up her own interests, that is, that she desires nothing more in the world than to see her daughter in the house of d'Este. In this matter, great dexterity and diligence will be used to make sure that Signor Giangiordano is happy that she comes to Rome, unquote. Now, we don't know what Giangiordano thought of this idea of marrying his daughter into the d'Este family.
I wouldn't want to.
Well, both Giangiordano and the d'Este were pro-French, so that was well and good.
Okay.
But would he have wanted to antagonise the Pope?
No. And nobody stays normal.
No.
Next thing you know, you're going to be battling them, and now you've got a daughter in the family.
I'm not sure what Isabella wanted for her brother Ippolito anyway. He was already a cardigan.
Cardigan.
He was already a cardinal.
I like cardigan better.
He wanted, yeah, perhaps we ought to have they want the red cardigan in future instead of the hat. Unfortunately, this was bad timing on Felice's part. Alfonso had come to Rome, and then, fearing for his safety, had sneaked off home, leaving a very miffed Julius. Another letter winged its way to Isabella, quote, last Wednesday, Sappho went to Lesbia to speak about the matters of your Excellency's affairs, but she found the widow, that's another code name for Julius, in a great fury as the Duke was gone and had been seen in Bolsena. Sappho could not talk with the Pope as she just left the palace, unquote.
So she says the widow, and then he says the widow, and then he says the Pope later.
I like the fact that he obviously forgets he's writing in code.
Jeez. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Well done.
The spies go. Yeah, it's
Not
not
so
the
great.
best, no.
A fail grade. I'm going to put the code at the bottom, and then I'm just going to stop using it halfway
Yes.
through.
Well, it's all gossip, so none of it's really that important, I don't think. Whether this was punishment for her meddling, I'm not sure, but Julius refused to let Felice become governor of Pesaro. And I think she was keen on it because Lucretia Borgia had been Countess of Pesaro, only through her husband, and Felice wanted to own it in her own right, so she proposed to buy it.
Does she have the money for that?
Presumably. I mean, for a start, the Pope has given her the money.
Right.
Her rival for Pesaro was Francesco Maria della Rovere, the Duke of Urbino. Oh. And he was the one we heard about in Julius's episode who pulled the tyrannical cleric that had been left in charge of Bologna off his horse as he entered Rome and stabbed him.
Ooh.
And he was generally thought to be a loose cannon and generally useless.
Great.
Despite that, Felice had petitioned him to be pardoned for the stabbing. So I think she thought,
What?
He's more likely to sell this place to me if I'm nice to him.
I can't see him doing that.
Well, if her dad says no, you can't do it anyway, I suppose that's that.
Yeah.
Again, we rely on the envoy of Mantua, who seems to have nothing else to do than report on Felice's actions. Quote, Sappho, wishing to speak to His Holiness about buying Pesaro, went to him and found him in a great rage.
Sappho is no longer a code, it's a nickname.
Yes. He greatly rebuffed her, saying he wants Pesaro for the Duke of Urbino, and spoke to her in such a way that she left Rome weeping, unquote. Felice really wasn't used to being told no, I don't think. No. And that seems to be that for Felice's help for Isabella d'Este for a few years, and she abandoned the idea of marrying little Julia into the d'Este family, which is no bad thing for little Julia, I don't think. 1513, and Julius suffered his final illness and died. Felice was at his deathbed, and he asked him for one last favour. Could he make her half-brother a cardinal? Julius said no, but he did give her back the money she had returned to him for his military campaigns. This was 21,000 ducats and probably made Felice the most independently wealthy woman in Italy.
Wow.
Felice was left out in the cold to a certain extent, since, despite Julius's unpopularity in his last years, there was now a concerted effort to make him appear like a saint.
Which means he can't have an illegitimate daughter.
No, you don't want to be waving your dirty linen about at this point. No. So it was thought best to park the illegitimate daughter for a bit. However, Michelangelo sought her out and gave her a present. The drawings for the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
Really?
Yeah. Felice was still in the property market. She bought a dilapidated church which she renovated and added to make a palace decorated by Michelangelo.
Wow. Man, could you imagine having a house decorated by Michelangelo?
Too busy, I think.
Oh, really?
I like a lot of colour in my house, as you know.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'd want naked Adams and Eves and
I'd want to be specific.
Yes.
Nobody naked and nobody dying, please.
Yeah, no harrowing of, The Last Judgment and none of that.
No. We want happy scenes.
Yeah, you don't want to turn over in bed and find you're face to face with a devil, do you?
No.
The church was San Felice, which was one good reason to buy it, probably a good omen. Another was that it was the garden where Lucullus had been. Messalina, the wife of Emperor Claudius, coveted the garden and planned to put Lucullus to death to get her mitts on his garden.
Okay.
Lucullus, seeing the writing on the wall, committed suicide, and Messalina got the garden, and it was in this garden that she was to meet her death. And Felice thought, this is great, I love this, I want it. It's got so much history.
Everything in Rome has history.
In a way, her father's death had taken the pressure off Felice. She must have been worried in the past whether she would go the way of many other papal offspring, but now it didn't matter. She had set herself up as an independent woman. In 1512, she gave birth to a healthy son, and so she ticked all the boxes.
Perfect. Now she doesn't have to touch her husband anymore.
They do have other children, so...
Okay.
Yeah, more teeth gritting, I think.
Yeah.
The birth of a son must have been quite a surprise, since it was thought you needed young sperm to father a boy.
Oh.
And Gian Giordano was 60 by this point.
Wow.
Felice was 30.
Ugh.
But Felice and Gian Giordano had gone to Loreto on pilgrimage, and this was the little hut that the knights had brought back from Jerusalem, said to be the one where the angel came to Mary and told her she was pregnant. And that must have worked, since the following day she had another... And the following day, that would have been a miracle. The following year she had another son. Then a year after that, a girl, her final child, and her name was Clarice, or Clarice, I should say, named after Leo X's mother, in an attempt to curry favour with the new pope.
Ah.
But Leo liked Felice anyway. All the other women in his life wanted something or other, which impoverished him. Felice had something to offer, being a businesswoman in her own right. And she created a hunting lodge on her land where Leo could come to satiate his bloodlust, since he'd emptied his own forest of animals. It seems to be quantity rather than quality with Leo, I think.
Jeez.
And in return, Leo gave her half-brother a red hat and issued a proclamation which said that should Felice ever commit a grave or serious crime, she would be absolved. But it was to prove quite handy later on.
Okay.
With the birth of a son, the Orsini accounts moved from Giordano to Felice. Apart from the expenditure on clothes and arms for the poor, we have these entries. 140 ducats for, quote, the murder of Tolfia de Di Caroli, the homicide of Castelnuovo, unquote.
So she paid assassins?
Well, having people bumped off was all part and parcel of running an estate when the feuds between families were going on. I like the fact they put it in the accounts.
Yeah.
For all to read.
Yeah.
And the 140 ducats didn't go to the assassin for services rendered. It went to the grieving widow and represented the man's earnings for life. So it seems a bit like, in Icelandic law, in the sagas, and if you kill somebody, you have to pay compensation. And then
Yeah, the wergild.
Yeah, and all's sort of forgiven.
Yes.
Seems to be quite similar to that situation.
I killed your husband, but now you don't have him, and you can have this money.
Yeah. I think she's meant to say, all right, fine.
Okay, thank you.
All's fair in love and assassinations. Felice set about embellishing that Dor Orsini castle that she'd been living in, implying that the birth of her sons had made her feel that she was now an Orsini proper.
Right.
With an interest in the family's property. With her various portfolios, including running a bank, Felice was now thought to be worth 56,440 ducats.
Wow.
So that's tens of millions of pounds in today's money.
Yeah. As a woman.
Yes.
Wow.
By 1517, Gian Giordano was showing his age, and seeing that the end was nigh, he invested Felice with the authority to serve as the Orsini regent, since his sons were still young. The elder one was 6. We still don't know what the husband and wife thought of each other. Neither particularly wanted to marry each other at the beginning. And the wedding ceremony must have rung some alarm bells for Felice.
Yes.
But she was actually lucky in her choice of husband, because he gave her more of a free rein than many husbands would have done.
True, he could have stopped her for any of that.
Yeah, some men would have seen it as a slight to his masculinity if his wife bought properties and ran businesses.
Yeah.
Gian Giordano died on the same day that Martin Luther stuck his 95 Theses on the door of Wittenberg Church. On her husband's death, Felice became not only the richest woman, but also the most powerful woman in Rome. Pope Leo recognised Felice's regency, provided that she remained a widow. So a similar situation that we saw with Margaret Tudor in Scotland, except with her being more likely to remain a widow than Margaret was. As we see time and again in Italy, some thought Gian Giordano's death hadn't been a natural one.
Come on, he's older.
The rumour was that he'd died without the last rites because his doctors hadn't thought he was very ill. His death had come out of the blue, and that was a bit suspicious.
Okay.
And who would most benefit from the death?
Yeah.
Felice was never accused outright, but this rumour just sort of hung in the air. Could she have done it?
Possibly.
I don't see how it would really benefit her at this stage, because she had everything she wanted.
And he's not getting in her way for anything.
Doesn't seem to. But even if she did, we know that she's been absolved from any crime, so, doesn't matter anyway. But Felice began to keep her distance from the rest of the Orsini family. Whether from distaste or fear, I'm not sure. She may have been a bit fearful since she now wrote her will. She was only 35, and unless she was going to marry again, her childbearing days were behind her, which was the most risky thing for a woman to do. What was worrying her was that if she died intestate, her properties would become Orsini properties. And they weren't Orsini properties, they were hers. She was adamant about that.
Yeah.
Her role as regent was immensely busy. She spent the autumn with her children, but the rest of the time was spent overseeing business in Rome, the Dower Orsini castle, and her own castle. Palo, I think it was called. She dealt with legal matters, accounts, appointing officials, buying of provisions, looking at the requests for alms and favours, presumably having people bumped off, I'm not sure. That's a point. If they wanted to know whether she'd poisoned her husband, they just needed to look in the accounts, didn't they?
Yeah.
And she did what we saw Maximilian doing, dictating letters from the back of a horse while she was going from one residence to another.
Oh, the poor scribe.
Yes. She interested herself in her tenants' lives. When she heard that a woman who was dying after childbirth had been prevented from making a will by her husband, who refused to allow her to see the lawyer, and so this woman had died intestate, Felice wrote to the overseer telling him to take proceedings against the man so that no one would dare do that again. So she was sticking up for the dying woman's independence.
She's a feminist.
She was sometimes asked by members of the Orsini clan to pardon murderers who were facing the death penalty, especially presumably they'd been employed by the Orsini clan. One man, I'm not sure who he'd killed, was facing death, but on the pleading of his stepdaughter Carlotta, Felice commuted the sentence to a fine. However, when she was asked to pardon a man who had killed his sister, she refused, and it seems that she didn't forgive men who killed women. And we thought Richard III was a micromanager. Felice even arranged for a bottle of wine to be sent to the men who were looking after her pigs. Even though Felice was 34 and the most powerful woman in Rome, her mother Lucretia still fretted when she heard she was ill or had toothache and sent her little remedies and advice. So
Isn't that what mothers do, though?
you never stop being a mother, do you?
No.
It's quite nice. I mean, this woman's a multi-millionaire and Lucretia's still saying, now wrap up warm. Now she had to look to her own children and stepchildren's marriages. I don't know what she'd have done if any of her children had said, no, I'm not getting married. I think she'd have just ploughed on it through anyway. Her stepdaughter married Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, the nephew of the Pico della Mirandola we covered in Patreon.
Yeah.
Her own daughter Giulia was betrothed to Pier Antonio di San Severino, and this was a canny move on Felice's part, since he was willing to accept a cardinalship for a member of the family in lieu of some of the dowry. This is why she's rich, because she doesn't part with any money.
Wait, so she is marrying her daughter off to a cardinal? Cardinals aren't supposed to get married.
No, the cardinalship's for a member of his family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's prince.
And how does she get him a cardinalship?
Well, that's it. She must have been very friendly with Leo.
Yeah, how friendly with Leo?
I think Leo's gay, so probably not that friendly.
Oh, okay.
However, by making this arrangement for her daughter, Felice had enraged his stepson, Napoleon, who had wanted that red hat for himself.
Ah.
Napoleon is an interesting character, and we will be hearing a lot more of him.
Okay.
If you were to read about Felice in Orsini sources, you might see an entirely different person than we've covered here. You would see a wicked stepmother depriving Napoleon of his birthright. The arrangement to depose Napoleon if Felice were to have sons of her own, although a common enough arrangement, was not liked at all by the Orsini family, because they saw Felice as muscling in with her own children and elbowing the Orsini out the way.
Which she was, kind of.
Yes, but I mean, it came with the territory. I mean, I don't think she made the arrangement that her children would take precedent over Napoleon. Napoleon was 11 when Felice's elder boy, Francesco, was born. And he'd have spent those 11 years assuming he'd succeed his father.
Right.
Napoleon was given an abbey as compensation, but he didn't see it as compensation at all, despite the fact that this abbey had nearly as much land as the Orsini had. You know, massive. Also, she kept her children away from him. He seems to have been a tad unhinged, and she was worried about what he'd do to them.
Ew.
And if you want an idea about what this, by now, 17-year-old boy was like, his rooms in the Orsini castle were entirely decorated in black.
Oh, emo kid! Or goth, or whatever you want to call.
Yes. He fits the image completely. I mean, as soon as I read that, the picture of him in my mind changed completely.
Dyed his hair, black eyeliner.
Especially as Gian Giordano had made everyone wear black anyway, because they wanted them to look like Spaniards.
Mm-hmm.
Felice had made arrangements to leave her stepdaughter Carlotta 30,000 ducats in her will. She left nothing to Napoleon. She thought that compromise would be seen as a sign of weakness, and she didn't want to risk it.
Oh.
But by not compromising, she was storing up a well of resentment in her stepson.
Yeah, who could take it out on her children that are younger than him?
Especially since she kept a not-so-motherly eye on the accounts from his abbey. She knew exactly what he bought at any time. Yeah, his black eyeliner, his Sisters of Mercy CDs, the lot. He was annoyed enough at Felice, but when she arranged for the red hat to be given to her prospective son-in-law, I mean, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. This was it, more. And then something awful happened to Felice. Leo X caught cold and died after watching a bullfight.
Oh, no.
The new Pope, Hadrian VI, who was the only Dutchman to become Pope, didn't know Felice and didn't care to know her. She was no longer had any influence in the Vatican.
Were they still buying her grain?
I'm not sure, because he was so horrified that a pope could have fathered a child that he deliberately kept his distance from her.
Ah.
So Napoleon saw his chance. Napoleon was hardly going to go after the Orsini castle, since that was his by rights anyway, as far as he was concerned. But the one she'd bought for herself...
Oh, no.
She'd bought it off an impoverished Orsini family member. And this couldn't be allowed to continue. That was a slur on the Orsini name. First, Napoleon gathered men for an attack on Palo, Felice's castle. Then, when she was away from the Orsini castle, he paid a visit there, took it, and threatened to kill all Felice's servants.
Oh, goodness.
Luckily for Felice, Napoleon wasn't able to keep the interest of his men, and they just faded away. And he was forced to abandon both castles. And he sent his stepmother a letter full of self-pity, saying that he had so little money that he was forced to eat snails in the valley.
Good. You tried to take my property, you little snot.
Yeah, no, I mean, also, he's got this massive abbey. I mean, why is that not making him money?
Yeah. Look at what I've managed to do.
Yes. He accused her of not bringing anything to the family in the way of kudos, since she was just a priest's daughter and had no bloodline to speak of.
Ooh.
Many of the Orsini were the same opinion, but Napoleon's actions do show him as being a very strange individual. Then Napoleon tried a different ploy. He went to Padua and signed up at the university. And he sent Felice a letter telling her of his plan, as if he'd found the ultimate way to hurt her. Oh. I don't know what he was thinking here. He wrote to her saying, "No, well, fine, right, I'm going to university, then you'll be sorry."
What?
Yeah, a very strange individual.
Yeah, okay. Good. Maybe you'll educate yourself out of this nonsense?
Nope, he doesn't do that.
Nope.
1523, and Pope Hadrian died. Few were unhappy, sadly for him. Mm-hmm. Another Medici Pope, Clement VII, famous for refusing Henry VIII his divorce. Felice was happy because she'd been close to the last Medici Pope, and she had high hopes for this one.
I don't know. She's getting farther and farther away in history with her relationship with her father, the Pope. Is she able to trade on that with the Medicis?
I think she's trading more on her friendship with Leo at this point, but yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure Julius is going to be any bargaining chip anymore, yeah.
Yeah.
Napoleon hadn't given up. He campaigned for the early declaration of his stepbrother's majority. What? This would end Felice's regency, and the younger the boys were when they took over, the weaker they'd be, and the more easily, at best, manipulated, at worst, goodness knows, and murdered? Probably. He said that the majority should be declared when the younger one was 14, at a young age to become an adult. And Napoleon also proposed that he should be given authority over Felice's younger daughter, Clarice, then just 10 years old. And this was an extremely alarming proposition for Felice. Mm-hmm. Luckily, Napoleon was thwarted. Pope Clement gave Felice 4 more years as regent.
Ah, perfect.
Yeah, that would be long enough to get Clarice safely married and out of Napoleon's clutches.
Yes.
Napoleon was to keep away, and he was to live at his own expense and not to expect Orsini handouts.
Ooh.
At some point, he was arrested for conspiring against the Pope. So Felice had won, but Napoleon was angrier than ever. He reminds me of Dick Dastardly, so curses foiled again. 1527, and Felice had been regent for a decade. The only time she could really relax was when she was with her family, her mother Lucretia and her stepfather Bernardino. And they probably reminded of a time when she wasn't beset by constant worries, I should think.
Yeah.
However, 1527 was a year famous for another event. The sack of Rome.
Right.
It It was absolutely horrific, and we'll cover it next season. So suffice to say for now, it was horrific. But what did it mean for Felice? The man who let Charles V's troops into Rome was Renzo de Cerri, a man who had helped Napoleon attack Felice's castle. And it was one of those little quirks of fate that Felice had so nearly avoided being there. She had been invited by her daughter to tour Calabria, but she didn't dare go in case Napoleon should take the opportunity to move in. Instead, she and her children were in Rome when Charles V's troops arrived. As a member of the Orsini family, they would be expected to stay at Monte Giordano, but Felice liked to keep her distance from the Orsini, and this saved their lives, because one of the first places the troops went was the Monte Giordano. Felice and her children were in the palace of Bernardino and Lucretia, her parents. But it was just a palace, it wasn't a fortress.
So there's no defence.
There's no defence. They decided their best chance of escape was to split up. And for some reason, they chose all the men to go in one group and all the women to go in another group, which sounds to me like a stupid idea.
Yes, it really does.
Yeah. I mean, it's full of probably drunken soldiers.
Yes.
I don't know why they decided to do this. The men went across the road to the house of a Flemish cardinal, assuming there'd be no reason to attack him because he was Flemish. Many others had had the same idea. But unfortunately, the sack of Rome was based on greed, not politics, and his house got ransacked with all the rest. Felice's family paid 4,000 ducats as security. Only it wasn't a guarantee of safety, since the soldiers often took the money and killed people anyway. They climbed out of the window and out of Rome. So I presume the house must have been quite close to the edge of Rome if they can climb out of a window and just go. They disguised themselves as muleteers and made their way hiding from the shoulders. I could never say that word. Hiding from the soldiers far enough from Rome to be safe. So that was the men sorted. But what of the women? Felice took her family to a place we visited before on Patreon, when we looked at Isabella d'Este's episode and how her house became a haven for people seeking shelter.
Right.
And it was one of the few buildings to remain unharmed. And it was unharmed because Isabella's son was in Charles V's army.
Yes.
Around 2,000 people sought shelter there. Felice and her family wore simple clothes so as not to draw attention to themselves, but hidden about her person she had all her jewels, which was just as well, since as we saw in Isabella's episode, she wasn't giving shelter out of the goodness of her heart.
No. Give me
They would
money.
have to pay, yes. Felice stood security for many of those who couldn't pay. And they were lucky that Felice was a friend of Isabella, and so they were able to get away with an escort of Isabella's son's men to Ostia.
Yeah.
There they were to take a boat. But the wind changed, and they had to huddle in the open, waiting to be spotted by troops. The following day, the wind changed again, and they were able to make their escape, but I bet that was the longest night they've ever spent.
God, no kidding.
Luckily for them, there was a Genoese boat there, and Felice was able to use her links with her father's hometown of Savona, near Genoa, and the captain agreed to take them to safety. Isabella d'Este went too, and if you remember, with a large number of antiquities that she appeared to have looted from Rome.
Right.
Another worrying aspect of the sack of Rome was what had happened to Napoleon, because he had been arrested for conspiring against the Pope and had been imprisoned in the Castel Sant'Angelo.
And the French might think, yay, you're on our side.
They let him out.
Oh, of course they did.
He then joined in with the other soldiers to loot and murder all across Rome.
Oh, gosh.
Felice was terrified that he'd now hunt them down and use the unrest as a cover for the murdering them all. And there'd be no papal reprisals since the Pope had run away. Felice decided to head for Urbino, where she had relatives. And they decided to split up again. Felice and her children sailed right up around Italy and up to Urbino, and the rest of them went to Venice. By June 1527, Felice and her family had settled in Urbino, leaving Rome far behind. The Duke and Duchess were away, but Felice wrote to the Duchess, quote, I would like to be able to show my mind's conception of the expression of my obligation, and that of my children, to His Excellency the Duke, and to your ladyship. So much humane action never ceases to invoke in me a continual sense of obligation. What gentility and rare virtue you have shown towards me, your servant, and what memories I retain of it. And what merits, even more than praise, is that I know that your demonstrations to me are not those of a lady and benefactress, but of a sister. Only God knows how you can be rewarded for your goodness. My tributes to you could never be sufficient were I to live for 1,000 years, unquote. So, happy to be out of Rome.
Yeah.
A not-so-nice element of Felice was that she heard that many other displaced nobles from Rome were drifting towards Urbino. She didn't really want to share it.
Okay.
She wrote to the Duchess pointing out their ties of family and how she had done favours for the Duchess in the past. So really, she deserved preferential treatment.
Okay.
In other words, I don't want to be living cheek by jowl with these people. The Duchess offered her the fiefdom of Fossombrone, just for her and her family.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit more than the spare room, isn't it?
Yes.
They moved in September and attempted to live a normal life, and she tried to find a tutor for her children, but all the humanists were in hiding, apparently. The Duchess of Urbino came to visit Felice in Fossombrone and was so impressed by the little court that she'd set up there that the Duchess decided there and then she'd live in Fossombrone too.
Oh.
And she bought a property and started doing it up. And the Duchess was Eleonora Gonzaga, and she was Isabella d'Este's daughter.
Okay.
Despite Felice's reduced circumstances, she was still getting letters from people, often previously wealthy people, who had been obliged to leave their wealth in Rome, begging her for money and help. She did her best to help them, but she had very little, and often the people she put them in touch with in the hope that they could help turned out to have lost everything themselves. Amongst these letters from people who had barely enough to eat, Felice received a letter from Isabella d'Este, bitterly lamenting that one of the ships carrying all those Roman artefacts back to Mantua had gone missing, and she was sure that the captain had stolen them.
Okay.
Felice wrote back to say that she had heard exactly what Isabella had heard, that the ship had been boarded by Moors and they'd taken everything. But the letter shows quite a lot of irritation at Isabella's priorities. You know, other people are writing saying,
Oh,
we've lost
dying of starvation
everything.
and you're worried about a statue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even worse, and another reason why we dislike Isabella intensely, it had been her son Ferrante who had taken the ransoms from the people hiding with Isabella in Rome. Of the people for whom Felice had stood surety, several of them had still unable to pay. Ferrante sent his mother letters reminding Felice of her surety, and Isabella sent them on to Felice.
Oh, okay.
Don't forget that money that my son forced out of everybody at their time of greatest need and distress is still owing. Felice decided to have nothing more to do with Isabella.
Jeez.
It wasn't until the autumn of 1528 that soldiers left Rome. It had started in May 1527. But most people didn't go back straight away because the city was now riddled with plague. Felice was in no hurry to return, but it wasn't plague she was afraid of. It was Napoleon.
Yeah.
He had taken control of the Orsini estates, and he'd become a pirate in his spare time.
Well, he is psychotic.
He certainly is, yes. He had then turned mercenary and was fighting the Medici in Tuscany. Eventually, Felice decided it might be safe for them to return to Rome, and she received a licence from Pope Clement allowing her and her family to stay in monasteries on their journey back home, figuring that would be safest. And it shows what a pull Rome had on her, because it sounds as if they got a nice cushy little number at Fossombrone.
Yeah.
But she needs to go back. When they got back to Rome, they found it completely devastated. Felice set about trying to put Orsini properties back to rights and pay off her debts, including to the captain who had taken them to safety from Ostia. She was quite depressed at this time, as I should imagine most people in Rome were.
Yeah.
There were food shortages, and Felice sent a letter of thanks to a servant for sending them a barrel of snails.
Ew.
Before snails had been seen as, that's what the peasants eat. Now they're grateful for them.
Ew.
She set about restoring the Monte Giordano, a place she'd never wanted to be before, but now she made it her main residence. And now she had to think of her daughter, Clarice, and still had to bear in mind that if Napoleon were to abduct her, and one of his men were to rape her, she would have to marry that man. Clarice was 14.
Gosh.
Felice had left her daughter in Pesaro since she didn't think it would be safe for her in Rome, and it was vital to find her a husband. Clarice seems to be the most scholarly of Felice's children, and a nice, much-beloved young woman, apparently. In fact, so beloved that her cousin, Guidobaldo, fell madly in love with her. He'd been betrothed to Catherine de' Medici when he'd been a child, but nothing had come of it. His family didn't want him to marry Clarice, partly because they'd already found somebody else for him, and also because they didn't want to antagonise Napoleon. Guidobaldo's father had expressed undying respect to Felice for many years, but to marry into her family, no, you've got to draw the line somewhere, haven't you? Poor Guidobaldo was to be disappointed. Felice found another husband for Clarice, the Prince of Stigliano. It's down south, far away from both Guidobaldo and Napoleon.
Yeah, never heard of it.
No. And now Felice's boys, Francesco and Girolamo. 1530, Francesco was 18, and he received the abbothood that had been Napoleon's. And Napoleon had given it up when he got married. He'd married a Colonna, which was an interesting choice for an Orsini.
Mm-hmm.
Francesco was a disaster at estate management.
Uh-oh. How do you not learn from your mother? Your mother is very good at this.
I think perhaps they're too good. Perhaps they don't let them do anything for ages. And,
right.
They say, oh, for goodness sake, look, I'll do it. And they don't learn. Francesco took no interest, and the estate was soon corrupt and uneconomic. And the Pope was furious because that was church property, and he was hearing stories of abuse coming from it. He's not only incompetent, he's an unpleasant character. Felice knew the importance of keeping in with the Pope, so she tried to cover up for her son. When taxes didn't turn up, she wrote to the equivalent of the tax office, implying that, it's just got lost in the post. Of course he sent it. And then she'd pay it herself. Not the way to teach him how to be a good estate manager.
No.
Felice made her younger son, Girolamo, Lord Bracciano, the dower Orsini castle. Despite the fact he was a younger son, but given how Francesco had managed his estate, it sounds like a good plan.
Sounds like a good plan, yep.
Yeah.
You need somebody who can make money, because the other one's just going to suck it dry.
Well, Girolamo just wanted to be a condottiere.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Felice sent him to stay with his sister down south, but he was desperate to get back to Rome. And one of the reasons he wanted to return was that he had developed a hatred for Napoleon. Not surprisingly, given that his stepbrother had expressed an interest in killing him.
Yeah.
So no longer was the feud between the Orsini and the Colonna. It was between different factions of the Orsini. Even France got involved. Francis I wrote to Felice telling her to sort out her family. The last thing France wanted was its main ally in Italy, the Orsini, at each other's throats. Yeah. Napoleon's role as a condottiere had made him rich enough to afford soldiers of his own. And Girolamo was also a condottiere, because his mum had got him a position fighting with Ferrante Gonzaga, Isabella d'Este's son.
But he hasn't had as many years to gather that wealth through, pillaging.
Well, she's got him a position fighting in Hungary, which presumably she's thinking, that's a nice long way away. Girolamo also had men, about 200 of them. But he had sent them on ahead, leaving himself with just 10 men. Somehow Napoleon got to hear about this, and he marched with 300 men to Vicovara, where Girolamo was. So 300 to 10. So is this going to be the story of the plucky little underdogs beating the big bad wolf?
No.
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 No. Inevitably, Napoleon took Girolamo hostage. And the ransom for his freedom was his birthright. Felice was beside herself with worry, and here we can see a bit of Caterina Sforza about her. You would think, of course she'd give in to Napoleon's demands. You know, he's got her little boy.
Yes.
Even though the little boy was 19, but still a little boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But she had battled for her son's birthrights for 15 years, and she was damned if she was just going to hand them over to Napoleon now.
And there's no guarantee that once she does that, he's going to release her son.
No, well, that's it. It's not an entirely callous act, because, yes, she would be thinking, what's the point? He's going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
I'm amazed Girolamo's still alive, frankly.
Yeah, so am I.
Felice had other plans. She was going to take Vicovara and get Girolamo out of there. A posse of cardinals headed to Vicovara to negotiate with Napoleon. Also, the Pope authorised the movement of 1,000 troops under yet another Gonzaga, and Felice sent a letter to Gonzaga thanking him for taking on the mission and willing him to be careful since Napoleon was a nutter. Honestly, he will do anything. Meanwhile, she set about selling grain to raise money to pay the troops. But it was going to be difficult to besiege Vicovara since Napoleon had the hostage. Felice received a letter, ostensibly from Girolamo, quote, "Up until today I had every faith in you as a mother, but now I am doubtful of the care you have for my life, and I should tell you that this will be the last letter you receive from me. I have found more mercy from our capital enemy, Signor Napoleon, than I've had from you," unquote.
Oh, you ungrateful little so-and-so.
It's unlikely he wrote it.
Oh, okay.
And we know he didn't write it because Girolamo's writing was absolutely appalling, like his dad. And this is quite readable, this letter.
Okay.
So we think it was dictated by Napoleon
Does
to somebody.
she believe he wrote it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
The troops tried to storm Vicovaro, and it was something of a disaster. More papal troops died than Napoleon's troops. And Gonzaga himself received an arrow wound to the shoulder. Oh, I've done it the other way around this time. He received an arrow wound to the shoulder, and he died a slow and agonising death. Felice organised more troops. It's just sort of throwing men at it. She even got in touch with Guidobaldo, who had been so in love with her stepdaughter Clarice, and luckily Felice had kept good relations with him. When Napoleon looked out of his window, he could see more and more troops amassing out there. He sneaked away under the cover of darkness, taking the entire contents of the chapel with him. But Girolamo was free.
Yeah.
Yeah. The escapade cost a fortune to both Felice and the Pope. And the Pope made it clear he wouldn't be doing that again. So sort out your family.
Mm-hmm. And the only way I can see is by killing off Napoleon.
Well, the Pope's not going to do it. He's a Pope. Popes don't do that sort of thing. Under pressure from France, the Pope absolved Napoleon and his men, and he made the division of Orsini territory between Napoleon and Girolamo. Felice kept up appearances, but she must have been furious that Napoleon appeared to have won. You know, he took a hostage, and he seems to have gained from it. Mm-hmm. Christmas 1533, and the whole family was together. Dondili, obviously they didn't invite Napoleon. But Felice and her half-siblings, Giulia was there with Prince Bisagno and their two little girls. Clarice was there with Prince of Stigliano. Francesco and Girolamo were also there. It's the first time they'd all been together for ages. And the celebrations carried on till January. But then the news arrived. Napoleon was on his way to Rome. We don't know what happened to Girolamo while he had been Napoleon's prisoner, but it seems likely that Napoleon wouldn't have let the chance to mock Girolamo and his family go by.
Yeah, hoping no torture or anything.
Yeah, well, he must have felt powerless and humiliated. And it was payback time as far as he was concerned. But Napoleon said that all he wanted to do was to see his sister Clarice, just to say hello.
Oh, right.
Just popping by. It's Christmas and all, come on. It was decided that the best thing for Clarice and Giulia, and their respective princes, was to head for home as quickly as possible. Felice, Francesco and Girolamo accompanied them some of the way. Felice and Francesco turned back, but Girolamo carried on with them for a little while longer. But then Napoleon caught up with them. Girolamo drew his sword, ran him through and killed him.
Oh, thank goodness.
That's as much detail as we have.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, it just seems as if he turned up and said, "Hello, I've come to see back." Oh, that was it. Girolamo was condemned to death.
What?
But since no one blamed him for what he'd done, it was commuted to a short stay in prison and a large fine. And the stay in prison was academic anyway, because he wasn't there. He carried on south with his sisters. He wrote back to his mother, presumably explaining what had happened. But his writing was so appalling that no one can read what it says.
Oh,
so
dear.
We might have had a bit more detail, but for his terrible writing. What's the point? I mean, what's the point of sending a letter
that nobody could read?
Yeah. Get someone else to write it if you can't do it. The Pope, although he had every reason to dislike Napoleon, had also been put in a difficult position. France had favoured Napoleon. And the Pope's niece had just married the French king's son. That's Catherine de' Medici, by the way. He had to be seen to be doing something to Girolamo, so he confiscated both Vicovaro and the dower Orsini castle, Bracciano.
That seems so dumb. He was kidnapped and held hostage by this man. If he shows up again...
It's politics, not morality, yeah. To lose Bracciano would have been a disaster for the Orsini, and Felice decided she couldn't let it happen. She went to the Pope to negotiate for its return, and in fact the whole thing was just a sham. Felice knew the Pope wanted to return it to her, but he had to appear to be upholding France's demands.
Right.
So they went through the pantomime of Felice begging and the Pope holding out and then giving in. However, he wasn't going to do it for nothing. But how was Felice to find the money? She'd forked out a small fortune over the last few years, and she had nothing coming in since floods had ruined the grain crop.
Ooh, okay.
Also, it was obvious the Pope wasn't well. And since she didn't know who'd succeed him, it was vital to get the money to him before he died.
Right, so she could say it's done.
Yeah, she'd need to find 10,000 ducats. She got part of it from the Archbishop of Benevento, and the rest from her son-in-law, Prince Stiliano. However, the negotiations went on day after day, with Cardinal Ippolito de' Medici exhausting Felice. It must have been so frustrating because the Pope was obviously dying, and yet the negotiations were so slow. And there was a scare when the rumour was put out that the Pope was dead. This seemed to jump-start the negotiations, and Cardinal de' Medici finally agreed. All that was needed now was the official papal paperwork, but the Pope had agreed verbally. Bracciano would belong to Francesco and Girolamo. Not that they deserved it any more than Napoleon did.
No.
Felice put it about that it had been Francesco who had raised the money and done the negotiations, whereas in fact he'd done absolutely sod all. She'd done it all. But it didn't look good if she wanted her sons to be respected, to show that Mum had done it.
This is very much Caterina Sforza. Strong mothers, useless sons.
Awful children, yeah. Well, sons, yeah. The girls all seem to turn out all right, don't they? It's the sons that just...
Yeah.
Yes, because I remember Caterina Sforza's son writing to her while she was in a dungeon.
Money.
Why don't you give me money? Don't you love me?
Yeah.
By 1535, Girolamo was at the castle of Bracciano. What he needed now was a wife. And there's no point getting the castle back if there was no dynasty to leave it to. Felice wrote to Girolamo asking him to send some of the money he'd made by the sale of goods from the Bracciano estates to pay off some of the debt she'd incurred getting the castle back for him.
And he's going to say no.
He pretended not to understand. He said, well, why are there debts? I don't understand. Don't know what you're talking about. In the end, she had to sell her castle at Paolo, the castle she bought with her own money to ensure her independence.
I would disown him.
Yeah. Yeah. They haven't followed in her footsteps, have they?
No.
And I can't even say they followed in their dad's, because, I mean, he was quite a go-getter in his way.
Yeah.
They're useless.
Yeah.
They're completely overprivileged.
Yeah.
Girolamo didn't really want any of this. He wanted to be for soldier, I say shoulder. For shoulder, I say soldier. He wanted to be a soldier. He wasn't going to sign up to France like his father had done, since Francis I had backed Napoleon. He wasn't going to do that. He decided to throw in his lot with Charles V. And Felice was none too happy about that. St. Charles's soldiers had sacked Rome, and now Girolamo wanted to be one of them. But he couldn't get his commission without Felice's say-so, because we saw in the Paston episodes that a boy needs to ask his mum if he wants to go to war. However, in 1536, Girolamo had joined Charles's army. It's possible that money had swayed it for Felice. Maybe he finally said, "Oh, those debts. Oh,
yeah.
right, yes, okay. I'll send you the money.
I'll give you money and I'll go."
She didn't want Francesca to feel left out while she was finding a wife for Girolamo, so she kept stressing to him that it'd be only a matter of time before he got that red hat. This was despite the fact that she knew him to be a cruel man who persecuted his tenants.
Oh,
Not really cardinal material.
no, like, really. Own up to the fact that your children suck.
I don't know, it's very difficult, I should think. But yeah, they really are pretty awful.
Yeah.
The girl she chose for Girolamo was the daughter of Count Bosio Sforza of Santa Fiora, Nepama. Her mother was Costanza Farnese, whose father had just been elected Pope Paul III.
Oh.
Now, he was Alessandro Farnese, who had been made cardinal by Alexander VI, because he was the brother of Alexander's girlfriend Julia.
Yeah.
If you remember, the other cardinals were none too pleased that Alexander had made both the brother of his girlfriend and his son Cesare cardinals.
Yes.
But it did mean that both Girolamo and his wife were the grandchildren of popes, which is an extraordinary coincidence.
Yeah, and so not appropriate.
By 1535, Felice's health was failing. We don't know what was wrong with her, but it affected her movement. She started using what she called a litter bed. She would literally carry it about on a bed, I presume. By September, she wrote to Francesco, quote, "I'm feeling a little indisposed today," unquote. And the last letter we have of hers asks Francesco to grant someone a place in his abbey. On the 27th of October, she wrote her will. It was a bit different from the last one, since she hadn't very much left to leave. Soon after, at the age of 53, she died. Many people sent condolences to Francesco and Girolamo, but Cardinal Contarini wrote to tell Francesco that his mother had always sent him, quote, "a quantity of Bracciano wine, which I found suited to my taste and my stomach," unquote. You know, sort of, I sincerely hope you'll be continuing this tradition. So, what happened to her children? Girolamo married Francesco il Bosio Sforza a year after Felice's death. He only lived for a few years more. He left a son, Paolo, who would grow up to be like his father, only much worse. We might come across him again. Francesco sank into laziness and dissolution after his mother died.
Not surprised.
Pope Pius condemned him to death,
Ooh.
but he ran away into exile. We might pick up his story another time, next season. We don't know when Clarice died, but her husband took a second wife, so we assume she probably did. Julia was strangled by her husband, the Prince of Bisagno, when she failed to give him a son.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that's quite a shock, isn't it, when you get the epilogue? Hey, what's happened to everybody? And you find that. But anyway, that is the lengthy story, for a cameo, of Felice, Pope's daughter, very much a person in her own right.
Yeah, that was not a cameo episode. That's a full episode.
Yes.
More so. Oh, dear.
But I just got so engrossed in her story, I didn't feel I wanted to leave any of it out, because she seems amazing.
She does, except for her blind spot for how awful her sons are.
Yeah. Yeah. And Caterina Sforza was the same.
Yes.
I mean, when Caterina Sforza stood on the battlements and said, "Oh yeah, kill them, I can make more."
Yes.
Part of you later on thinks, yeah.
You should have stuck with that.
If only they had.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. Thank you for listening.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.